Welcome to Sherlock Mysteries, where every case takes you deeper into suspense, secrets, and thrilling investigations inspired by the world of detectives. If you love solving puzzles and uncovering hidden truths, you're in the right place. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the like button, and tell us in the comments which part of the world you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. Now, let's start the story. The painted chamber was always silent in the morning. The way the heavy draperies, the color of dried blood, obscured the sun, the way the parquet floor absorbs footfalls, and the way Lady Dalray's voice, which had once been a whip-crack presence, had ultimately grown mute on the eve of her 60th birthday. Lady Cynthia Dalray's maid discovered her mistress sitting erect in the high-backed chair beneath the central mural, her untouched brandy glass at her side, and her mouth locked in a faint, almost amused smile. The tableau on the wall above her, an intricate painting of Persephone being snatched by Hades, appeared to ripple in the gaslight, mocking the stillness underneath. The maid, a young girl with a soft Irish lilt and no experience with death, mistakenly assumed her ladyship was sleeping, but then she noticed the strange tilt of Lady Dalray's neck. Dalray Hall, a rambling, ivy-covered manor in Surrey, responded fast. Sir Wilfrid Dalray, her third husband and 10 years younger than her, was roused from his separate chamber with extraordinary calm. Mrs. Fenley, the housekeeper, called the local physician, who arrived quickly and left in a whisper. The doctor would not say it openly, but his hesitating demeanor signaled what others would soon suspect. Lady Dalray had not died naturally. She'd been helped. Within an hour, the staff was advised to stay inside, and the few guests who had arrived early for the birthday celebration planned for that evening were politely urged not to go. The police arrived around mid-morning, took a few unobtrusive notes, and began what one inspector subsequently described as a preliminary evaluation with no definitive cause. That same afternoon, Sir Wilfrid quietly suggested that a message be wired to London. It said, "Urgent assistance requested. Lady Dalray died under suspicious circumstances. Uncertain cause. Guests and staff are present. Discretion is paramount. Kindly dispatch Monsieur Hercule Poirot." Meacham, the butler, opened the door for Hercule Poirot not 24 hours later, allowing in a gust of fresh air and the characteristic clatter of the Belgian's patent leather shoes across the threshold. Poirot, dressed beautifully in dove-grey spats and a navy-blue coat, paused to remove a single speck of lint from his lapel before addressing the expectant faces. "I come at the request of Sir Wilfrid Dalray," he told me. "I do not trespass where I am not wanted." "No one here would call it trespassing, monsieur," Sir Wilfrid responded as he descended the stairs, his hand gliding down the polished rail. His pale, melancholy countenance showed no evidence of strain beyond what one could anticipate from a sudden widowhood. "We are disturbed, deeply so. The local authorities have not ruled it murder, but they have also not ruled it out. And you, Monsieur Poirot, are recognized for seeing things others don't." Poirot offered a slight tilt of his head. "Sir Wilfrid, it is not enough to have eyes to see. The mind must watch, and the spirit must understand." Sir Wilfrid's smile was tight. "Then you've arrived to the right place. There are plenty of puzzles in this mansion." As Poirot removed his gloves, he gazed up at the magnificent staircase and the painted ceiling above, Romanesque in its flourishes, garish in color, and rich in myth. He then turned back to Sir Wilfrid. "I will see the room, if you please." The painted room was at the heart of Dalray Hall, a domed octagonal salon designed a century ago by a bored duchess enamored with classical tragedy. The walls were muralled, from floor to ceiling, each showing a distinct story of mythological misfortune. Orpheus and Eurydice, Icarus collapsing mid-flight, and Narcissus staring indefinitely below. The centerpiece just opposite the entryway, and framed in a massive bronze border, depicted Persephone being taken to the underworld, her arm raised in a wordless lament. Lady Dalray had died beneath the portrait. Poirot went slowly around the room, arms clasped behind him, his polished shoes barely murmuring on the floor. There is no sign of struggle. There is no overturned furniture, there were no spilled drinks. The brandy glass remained on the small table. Full, untouched. Not even the rim was discolored. Poirot took this with curiosity. "She was found here?" he asked quietly. "Yes," Sir Wilfrid answered, still in the doorway. "Exactly so. The maid discovered her before morning. I was told she hadn't cried out. No signs of intrusion. None. No poison found. No residue. The glass is clean. The doctor discovered no traces on her lips or fingertips. But her neck—" Sir Wilfrid cleared his throat. "There was an odd angle, as if it were deliberately broken," Poirot said gently. "See, I read the wire, mon ami. I don't think you summoned me for indigestion." Sir Wilfrid exhaled, possibly relieved to be able to remove the mask of imprecise politeness. There were no screams. No sound. The windows were fastened from the inside, and the door was unlocked but closed. In addition to myself and the staff, there were 3 other visitors in the house that night. Then already we narrow the field. Poirot gently pivoted in place, allowing his gaze to scan the room. The housekeeper, the maid, yourself, and the guests. He paused. "May I ask, who stands to inherit?" Sir Wilfrid's brows rose slightly. "Cynthia's fortune was her own, family funds. She did not delegate everything to me, if that is what you are indicating." "I don't imply anything. I only inquire. The question of purpose usually arises, doesn't it? Who benefits? Who is fearful? Who hates?" Sir Wilfrid nodded briefly, his voice tightening. "She wasn't loved by everyone. I will not pretend that she was. Cynthia might be sharp." Poirot's gaze returned to the mural. "She decided to sit beneath. Persephone. That makes me curious. She liked that particular painting. She liked the moment of descent into hell?" Sir Wilfrid did not respond. Poirot took another look at the chair, which was tall, claw-footed and crimson velvet. The kind of chair one might image a throne on a terrible stage set. The type of chair in which one may feel superior to others, even in death. "Tell me, this room," Poirot began, "was it often used at night?" "No. Only for rare occasions, or when she desired to be alone. She was fond of this room. She called it her thinking chamber." Poirot considered it. "Was the door locked when the maid arrived?" "No, but it was shut, as if she had desired privacy but expected no threat." Poirot moved closer to the chair. He bent over to inspect the floor. A small scuff on the wood, a drag trace only inches long. Poirot didn't touch it. He simply took out his small notepad and scribbled a discreet note. Then, returning his gaze to Sir Wilfrid, he requested softly, "Would you be so kind as to arrange that I meet the guests?" "They're already waiting," Sir Wilfrid responded. "I thought it was better if they stayed near. In reality, they have not yet left the house." "Très bien," replied Poirot. "Let's examine what echoes the painted chamber left behind. Not only does the voice create an impression, but so does the stillness that follows." Poirot adjusted his tie and turned into the hall, where 3 guests waited behind locked doors, each of them a part of the sad mural depicting Lady Cynthia. Dalray's dying evening. Hercule Poirot paused just inside the library's doorway, looking over the semicircle of chairs set out for him. Sir Wilfrid had assembled the 3 guests as requested, each seated apart, as if invisible lines had been erected between them. A fire glowed in the grate, yet the room felt cold, with a faint pulse of tension beneath the surface. Poirot moved forward with his customary precision, taking his seat not at the front of the room, but squarely in the middle of the arc, facing them. He steepled his fingers and waited for a moment of silence before speaking. "I thank you for your patience," he remarked with a polite nod. "My name is Hercule Poirot, and I've been requested to investigate the circumstances surrounding Lady Dalray's death. I hope you will allow me to ask you a few questions, mesdames and messieurs. The truth rarely shouts. It whispers." He turned first to the tall, spare woman seated near the window. Her hair was pulled back into an exquisite twist, and her attitude was one of deliberate detachment. "You are Miss Daphne Ellison, I believe." She tilted her head. "I am. I've known Cynthia for, well, since we were debutantes. That makes it more than 40 years. I arrived the previous evening, as suggested. Cynthia was preparing a little celebration, a last-minute affair," she explained. Poirot offered her a slight smile. "And how was Lady Dalray's mood when you last saw her?" "Commanding," Miss Ellison answered, and a short flicker of something sarcastic passed over her lips. She always was. She instructed me to wear something jewel-toned, not black, because she was tired of mourning at every event. That was our Cynthia. When she gave an order, one followed. Poirot's brow rose. She gave many orders, I take it. Certainly. Cynthia enjoyed orchestrating life and humans. She had the temperament of a composer, while others were instruments to be played at will. Poirot nodded slowly and turned to the man seated in the middle chair. He was younger than the others by at least a decade, clean-shaven, sharply dressed, and possessed of the sort of anxious energy that betrayed itself in the drumming of his fingers against his knee. "And you, monsieur?" Poirot asked. "You are Mr. Felix March?" "Yes," the man replied swiftly. Yes, I am an art dealer. I was one of her advisors. Last year I handled the sale of 2 of her most major pieces. We remained in touch. I am not sure why she invited me to this party. I assumed she was a guest, but she implied she had something to talk about." Poirot leaned slightly forwards. "What's the matter?" "Of art?" "I assumed so," Felix said, but the little crinkle in his forehead indicated otherwise. She had been hinting in recent letters at changes, something she wanted to complete. I assumed perhaps she wanted to offload a few more pieces. She was never sentimental about her collection. Did she mention which pieces? No, only that she'd been re-evaluating their legacy. Her words, not mine. "And how did she appear to you? Troubled? Resolute?" "Neither," Felix replied, pausing. "More theatrical than usual. When I arrived, she had a peculiar expression in her eyes, as if she were staging something." Poirot let the remark linger, before turning his attention to the final guest, who was seated farthest from the fire. She was older than Felix, possibly in her mid-50s, with steel-grey hair and an expression of worn intellect. Her gaze had been focused on Poirot since he came. "You are Mrs. Clarice Duval, n'est-ce pas?" "Yes, Cynthia's cousin. We grew up together. And you were invited for the birthday gathering?" "I was summoned," Mrs. Duval explained dryly. "Cynthia was never invited. She expected. And I, like the obedient relative I have always been, arrived." Poirot's eyes narrowed with polite interest. "And how did you find her, Madame Duval?" Mrs. Duval hesitated before saying, "Unsettling. I believe she was performing a role, trying too hard to find amusement. I inquired as to the true nature of the occasion. It was unusual for her to throw a party for herself. She chuckled and said she wanted to share something with us all before it was too late." Poirot tilted his head. "Did she specify what that was?" "No," Mrs. Duval responded, "but I saw her enter the painted chamber later that night. She held an envelope, pale blue. I remember complimenting her on her nails, and she held up the envelope saying, 'This is better than Polish. This is proof.' Proof of what, madame?" "I have no idea." But she appeared triumphant. Poirot sat back, taking in each word with his customary quiet economy. Then he inquired quietly, "May I ask, did any of you hear anything in the night? Is there a voice, a movement, a cry?" Miss Ellison shakes her head. "My room is located distant from the painted room, and I sleep with earplugs." Felix gave a pathetic shrug. "I admit that I drank too much with dinner." "I fell asleep fully dressed." Mrs. Duval frowned slightly. "There was something. I believed I heard footsteps at 2 p.m., lightweight ones. I figured it was the maid." Poirot nodded slowly. "That may prove important." There was a pause, and Felix March leaned forward, his voice quiet. "You don't think this was suicide, do you?" Poirot directed his gaze at him. "No, monsieur, I do not." Felix appeared startled. "However, there was no poison, no weapon." Poirot stood. "There was a mind, the motive, the opportunity. Murder, it is not always so crude as the dagger or the bullet. Sometimes it's the pressure, the dread, or the silent persuading. Sometimes it's hands." He began to pace slowly. "You mentioned she was dramatic, that she had something to reveal, that she behaved as if she were doing a performance." He made a sudden turn toward Mrs. Duval. "You say she was carrying an envelope, one that she said was evidence." He nodded to himself, then turned back to face the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, please do not leave the premises. I'll chat with the maid next and then perhaps return to the painted chamber. There are still echoes that I have not heard." He gave a quick bow and turned to depart. At the threshold, he hesitated and said, "Oh, and one more thing. If you locate a pale blue packet, please bring it to me immediately. It may contain the reason your hostess died." Poirot exited the library, leaving behind a silence similar to that of the painted room, a silence thick with meanings just out of reach. The corridor outside the library was quiet, as the old stone walls of Dalray Hall muffled the sounds of the day. Poirot moved with a steady pace, hands clasped neatly behind his back, and gazed down in contemplation. The pale blue envelope had become the ghost of the room. Its contents, its whereabouts, its implication. If Lady Dalray had actually intended to reveal something conclusive enough to be deemed proof, then it was not only a question of who stood to benefit from her death, but of who had most to dread what she would expose. He made his way to the servants' wing, pausing just at the threshold to collect himself. Ellen, the maid, was regarded as youthful, capable, and loyal. Poirot knocked lightly, and within moments a girl around 19 opened the door. Her eyes, red-rimmed but alert, expanded slightly as she spotted him. "Monsieur Poirot?" she inquired, almost uncertainly. "Oui, mademoiselle," he replied kindly. "May I come inside?" "It will not take long." She nodded and led him into a small sitting area adorned with bookshelves and faded portraits of former employees. She hesitantly beckoned for him to sit, but she stayed standing, gripping the edge of her apron. "I know why you're here," she explained, her voice shaking. "This is about Lady Dalray. I kept going over it in my thoughts, sir. I should have realized something was wrong, but she seems peaceful." "Like always," Poirot gave her a nice grin. "Mademoiselle, do not torment yourself. Let us start with the basic details. What time did you last see Lady Dalray alive?" "Just after midnight," she said. "She rang for tea. She loved it plain, no sugar, no milk. I brought it into the painted room. She claimed she'd be there late to sort paperwork. I thought her mood was weird. She wasn't sharp as usual, almost soft, as if she was lost in her own thoughts." "Did she say anything else?" "She inquired whether the visitors were all in their rooms. I said I believed it. Then she smiled and informed me, 'It will be done before dawn.' I didn't know what she meant." Poirot leant forward slightly. "Was there anything else in the room when you left her?" "Yes, a glass of brandy on the small table, and there were documents, stacks of them. I believe she took some from the desk in her study. Did you see the envelope?" "Pale blue." The girl furrowed her brow. "Yes, I did it." "It was in her lap. She was holding it as she spoke to me. She tapped it with her fingertips, which reminded me, said it was something everyone should see. And in the morning, mademoiselle, when you returned, did you see the envelope then?" Her voice became quieter. "No, monsieur. It was gone. I recall seeking for it. I realized that her hands were empty. The alcohol had not been consumed, but the envelope was gone." Poirot's voice softened further. "And the door, was it shut?" "Yes, sir. I had to shove it open. It wasn't locked, but it seemed heavy, like if someone had just walked away." He nodded. "You didn't hear anything during the night?" "No voices." "No footsteps?" "There are no voices, but at 2 or a bit later I thought I heard the rear steps creak. I was still up folding laundry. It might have been the wind, but it didn't sound like it." Poirot straightened his cuffs. "You've been quite helpful, mademoiselle. One last question. Has anyone been near the painted room since?" She shakes her head. "Only police and Sir Wilfred. He went in the morning after they had left. He said he needed a moment." Poirot's eyes fluttered. "Indeed, merci, Ellen. That's all for now." He returned to the main hall, his mind working fast. The envelope had existed. Several people had witnessed it. Lady Dalray had described it as both proof and something to share. Poirot believed she had not planned a confession, but rather suicide. She had been planning a revelation. And someone had made certain that it never arrived. He found Sir Wilfred in the study, looking over a mound of condolence letters that had already begun to come. The man looked up wearily, waving him in. "I imagine you've spoken with the girl?" he queried. "Yes, I have. She noticed the envelope, you know, the one Lady Dalray held the night she died. Sir Wilfrid's eyes met Poirot's, then slid away. Yes. I've heard something about that. She said you entered the painted room the next morning. Alone. I did. I needed to say farewell. That was her favorite room. Poirot moved closer. And did you by chance see the envelope? Sir Wilfrid paused. No. Poirot said nothing but watched him. After a beat, Sir Wilfrid stood quickly and paced toward the hearth. Look, Monsieur Poirot. Cynthia was unpredictable, brilliant but theatrical. You've seen how she filled the room with her dramas, myths and symbols. She would have loved nothing more than to hint at a secret but never reveal it. She might have destroyed the envelope herself. No, mon ami, Poirot replied calmly. She wouldn't have done that. She wanted it visible. She informed the maid that it was evidence. She assured her cousin it will be disclosed. No, it was removed. Sir Wilfrid turned back to him, his voice hardening. Then accuse somebody. But don't assume that I am merely implying that you were alone with the body, that you had access to the room that you stand to inherit. Sir Wilfrid exhaled sharply. I won't respond to insinuations. Poirot nodded slowly. Very good. Then I'll proceed with the facts. He returned to the painted room again, this time alone. The light from the stained glass windows casts deep, strange shadows on the muralled walls. He stood beneath Persephone's outstretched hand before turning to investigate the side table alongside the chair. The brandy remained undisturbed. No fingerprints had been lifted, though the police had attempted. Poirot crouched and studied the floor again. The faint scuff mark, as though something had been dragged, remained intact. He took out a small magnifying lens and carefully slid it across the flooring. A small sparkle caught his eye beneath the table leg. He bent down to retrieve something wedged between the floors. A thin sheet of wax paper. Poirot unfolded it gently. The watermark Dalray Hall Personal was imprinted in faint but discernible lettering. It had originally been the back of an envelope, pale blue. Poirot delicately folded it into his pocket. The envelope had existed. Someone had snatched it. He straightened and gazed up at Persephone once more. The moment depicted there, of descent, kidnapping, and hush before violence, remained like a whisper. Poirot exited the room, his steps quicker and his intent firmer. One of them had lied. The envelope did not disappear by chance. It had been removed because it contained something hazardous, something worth killing for. And somewhere in this mansion the truth was still hidden, maybe not in a drawer or a safe, maybe not in a letter or document. However, this was only a gesture. In silence. In the discrepancy between what was stated and what was deliberately left unsaid, he would start again. With the cousin, Mrs. Clarice Duval professed to be dutiful, but Poirot noticed her eyes. She was no stranger to secrets, and secrets in Dalray Hall were rotting. The corridor leading to Mrs. Clarice Duval's guest room was panelled in walnut and adorned with paintings of long-dead Dalrays, haughty men in ruffs and gloved women looking out with bored superiority. Poirot took a modest, methodical step, pausing only once to examine a particularly strange painting of a man holding a silver mask in one hand and a sheaf of paper in the other. The autograph in the corner was faded, but clearly legitimate, maybe something from the Dalray collection. He felt confident that art will play a role in this situation. He filed the detail away and knocked softly on Mrs. Duval's door. She responded, very immediately, completely clothed, her hair beautifully fixed. Despite the fact that the brightness had diminished behind a thick blanket of clouds, her eyes showed no signs of slumber. I suspected you'd come, she continued, her voice steady. You are very perceptive, madame. I had hoped it would be after tea. Poirot permitted himself a slight smile. Then perhaps I shall make this swift. She stepped aside, allowing him to enter without additional ceremony. Her chamber was uncluttered, with austere furnishings in contrast to the rest of the hall, an indication, Poirot observed, of someone who travelled light, both literally and emotionally. Please, he murmured, taking a tiny chair near the hearth. We will not dance, you and I, but we will communicate directly. Mrs. Duval looked him over carefully as she took her seat. Is this where you ask what I was doing between midnight and dawn? "It is," replies Poirot, "but it is also where I ask you something far more interesting. What was in the envelope?" Her stance tensed slightly. "I told you I do not know." Cynthia didn't respond. "But you were present when she held it. You spoke to her. You said she appeared triumphant." "She did." "And yet," he replied gently, "you also mentioned that she appeared unsettled. That is a paradox, madam, and paradoxes are Poirot's favorite morsels." Mrs. Duval turned aside toward the window. The sun slanted in at an angle, catching the side of her face, making her appear older and tired than she was the day before. "I wondered," she replied slowly, "if she was bluffing." Cynthia liked to elicit reactions. She didn't lie precisely, but she did make a suggestion. Implied. She wanted everyone to know about that envelope, no matter what it contained, and she wanted someone to be scared by it. "Then you believe it was a trap?" Poirot asked. She considered. "Not quite. However, it was bait, and she was looking to see who flinched. Did you flinch, madame?" After a long interval, she turned to face him with resignation rather than defensiveness. "She and I were close once. I knew her before the marriages, and money hardened her. We were girls in the same house who pretended the world owed us something. Cynthia thought it did. I eventually realized otherwise." "You grew apart?" "No," she said with a faint, bitter smile. "She's outgrown me, or believed she did. She enjoyed meeting new people, including husbands, advisors, decorators, and the latest playwright. She preferred guys who respected her over ladies who scared her. But not you? I did not fear her. Nonetheless, I felt sorry for her, especially in the last few years." Poirot observed her in silence before saying, "And yet you came when summoned." Mrs. Duval's fingers tightened on the armrest. She was still family. Poirot nodded, allowing the silence to linger before speaking again. "Tell me, madame, do you know anything about her business affairs? Has she confided in you?" "She never confided, only boasted. She had lately amended her will, or so she said." "Did she indicate whom she was favoring?" Mrs. Duval's voice sounded flat. "Not you. Not me. And Sir Wilfrid. She said something odd. That he would receive precisely what he deserved. I didn't know if she meant it generously or not." Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. "And Mr. March? The art dealer?" Mrs. Duval gave a slight shake of her head. She enjoyed having Felix around, because he suited her tastes. She preferred to believe she had cultivated eyes, but I think she was tired of him. Poirot stood slowly. "You are not a sentimental woman, madame." "I was once," she said, and for the first time her voice became thin around the edges. "But in this family, sentiment has a short shelf life." Poirot tilted his head. "Thank you for your candor. It is the rarest currency in a house like this." As he entered the hall again, the butler, Meacham, approached from the far end, his demeanor discreet but firm. "Sir Wilfrid wishes to see you, monsieur." "In the West Gallery." "Indeed. Then he shall see me. But not before I ask you one small question, Monsieur Meacham." "Of course." "Have you ever seen Lady Dalray quarrel? Truly quarrel, not in jest, not in command, but with vehemence?" The butler blinked once, as if startled by the directness of the inquiry. "Yes, monsieur, once, about 2 months ago, with Mr. March." "Ah," said Poirot softly. "And what was the cause?" "Something to do with a painting, one he had advised her to purchase, I believe. She discovered it was not what he claimed. And how did it end? She told him if he ever stepped foot in her house again, she would expose him. But 3 weeks later he was invited to supper. I chalked it up to the usual drama." Poirot gave a short nod. "You are a man of observant restraint, Monsieur Meacham." "I find it keeps me employed," the butler said, with only the barest trace of irony. Poirot made his way to the West Gallery, a high-ceilinged corridor lined with tall windows and punctuated by heavy marble busts. Sir Wilfrid stood at the far end, staring at a canvas of Cynthia rendered in her youth, seated in the very painted room where she would one day die. The echo of her smile in the portrait chilled Poirot more than the wind through the glass. "You wish to see me?" Poirot said, approaching quietly. Sir Wilfrid turned. His expression was guarded. "I thought it fair to mention I received a call from my solicitor just now. Apparently there were amendments to Cynthia's will filed 3 weeks ago. Amendments? Poirot's voice was neutral. Yes. She cut me out almost entirely. And left her fortune to whom? To no one in this house, to a foundation, an arts fund. Poirot's brow rose. And this foundation, was it newly established? Sir Wilfrid nodded. Last year. She had her lawyer draw it up in secret. I only found out today. Then, said Poirot slowly, you had no financial motive for her death. Apparently not, Sir Wilfrid said bitterly, though I can't say it brings comfort. No, Poirot agreed, but it brings clarity. He turned back toward the hall, his mind forming sharper lines. The envelope, the painting, the false provenance. A foundation intended to outlive its benefactor, and one man who stood to lose much more than money, his reputation. Poirot realized he needed to speak with Mr. Felix March again. But this time, it's not about Lady Dalray's temperament or preferences. This time, it's about art and falsehoods. And how both may be painted so precisely that no one recognized what they were concealing, until, of course, somebody died. Poirot discovered Felix March alone in the drawing-room, staring at one of the lesser-known oils above the fireplace. Pastoral scene painted in delicate ochres and cool greens. The man did not turn when Poirot entered, but the change in his posture indicated that he had noticed. I wondered when you'd come again, he told me. Poirot gave no quick response. Instead, he approached the painting and viewed it from a few steps back. This is not by Coleman, he mumbled. Felix tilted his head. Excuse me. This painting, Poirot explained. It is credited to George Vicat Cole, although it is not his. The technique is imitative yet not authentic. Is this a forgery? Felix laughed, brief and breathless. You've quite the eye, Monsieur Poirot. Not the eye, Poirot said. An instinct. When something is overly meticulously crafted to appear authentic, it frequently is not. Felix eventually turned, his countenance strained. You're not accusing me of... Poirot lifted his hand. Not yet. But now, Monsieur March, I beg you to say plainly. No more deflections, no more performances. What happened between you and Lady Dalray regarding the forgery? Felix's jaws tightened, but he did not look away. It was a single painting. I obtained it from a reliable source. A putative John Opie, an early portrait that is unsigned yet documented. Cynthia paid a modest but reasonable sum. But it was not an Opie, Poirot explained softly. No, it was a clever reproduction, early Victorian but not historically accurate. She found out 2 months ago. And what did she do? She threatened to ruin me, Felix explained. She said she'd go to the newspapers and to my other clients. She said she'd expose every private acquisition I'd ever done, but she did not. She changed her mind, he explained, swallowing hard. At least she said she did. They invited me back. She stated that she wanted to discuss a more legitimate collaboration, one involving a foundation and the curation of her own private pieces. She offered forgiveness at a price. What price, monsieur? Felix paused. She wanted leverage, a list of traders known for slipping counterfeits into the hands of aristocracy who couldn't tell a Rubens from a radiator. Names she could use. Poirot's gaze hardened. What names could she threaten? Or names under her control? Felix gave a tired sigh. Control, I believe. Cynthia has always believed that information is power. I told her that I would think about it, but I hadn't agreed on anything. You had not, Poirot replied as he came closer. But if she had written those names down, if she had that in the envelope, then her death begins to make perfect sense. Felix's face turned pale. I didn't kill her. Poirot tilted his head. You feared her. You had a reason to. The envelope disappeared. The motivation is clear. I feared her, yes, Felix said, but I also respected her. I knew what she was. I didn't trust her an inch, but I admired the way she played. She could destroy a man with a sentence and make it sound like a compliment. I wouldn't have dared touch her. Poirot watched him for a long moment. Then you understand, monsieur, that I must now ask, where were you precisely between 1 and 2 in the morning? Felix's jaw worked. I drank more than I should have after dinner. I went up to my room around midnight. I remember lying on the bed, still in my shoes, drifting in and out. I remember the clock striking 2. I'd forgotten to wind my watch, and the chimes pulled me awake. I heard something in the corridor. Light footsteps, that's all. Did you rise, look into the hall? No, he said. It didn't feel like anything, just someone passing. Poirot said nothing, only gave a faint nod, and moved to the far end of the room, where another painting hung. This one was different, darker both in palette and mood. It showed a seated woman with her back to the viewer, facing a mirror in which her face was not reflected. "Tell me, monsieur," Poirot said quietly. "Was this part of Lady Dalray's original collection?" Felix blinked. "No, that was a recent addition. I believe she acquired it privately, through a dealer in Berlin." "It is unsigned?" "Yes," Poirot nodded again, "and yet it is the only piece here that cannot be identified or traced. Curious." Felix folded his arms. "You think that matters?" "I think," Poirot said, turning, "that Lady Dalray's choices were rarely accidental, and she liked her secrets where they could be admired without being understood." He left Felix without another word and returned to the hall where the silence of Dalray felt closer now, more claustrophobic. The walls whispered, the portraits stared. Poirot's next step was deliberate. He sought out Ellen, the maid, once more. She was in the still room, folding linens. "Mademoiselle," he said gently, "forgive me, but I must trouble you again." She looked up with a mixture of anxiety and trust. "Of course, monsieur. When you said you brought tea to the painted room, did you take the usual route?" "Yes, through the north passage, the side door to the salon." "And was it dark?" "No, sir. There was a small lamp lit already. She was sitting beneath the mural. She didn't get up when I entered, just smiled and said she'd been waiting." Poirot tilted his head. "She said that? Waiting?" Ellen nodded. "Yes. I thought she meant the tea." But Poirot did not think she meant the tea. He thanked the girl and stepped outside into the garden. The clouds had deepened, and a low mist curled along the edge of the hedge maze. Dalray Hall had grown quiet again, the kind of quiet that settles just before a confession. Poirot looked toward the painted room's tall windows. They were all bolted, the curtains drawn, but he noticed now, beneath the sill, a scuff on the brick. Very faint, very narrow, as though a boot heel had slipped against the stone. He stepped closer. There, in the soft earth just below, the shallow impression of a shoe. Not large, not deep, but there. Poirot knelt, fingertips hovering above the mark. Lady Dalray had said she was waiting for someone. Perhaps not from within the house, but without. He returned inside, moving quickly now, and summoned Meacham. "Monsieur," he said, "was there any delivery to the house yesterday? Any message or parcel?" The butler frowned. "There was a letter, arrived by hand. No return address." "Who received it?" "I did, sir. I gave it to Lady Dalray in the early afternoon. She opened it immediately, said nothing." "Did you see the paper?" "No." "And the envelope?" "Cream. Heavy. Not blue." Poirot nodded. Another envelope. Another silence. That evening, he stood once more in the painted room, alone. The chair remained, the empty glass. The murals loomed like silent witnesses, and above him, Persephone again, her hand still reaching, still falling. Poirot closed his eyes. Lady Dalray had been waiting for someone who never entered through the front door. Someone whose arrival was quiet, unnoticed. A person she intended to confront, or perhaps blackmail. She had called her guests here for a performance, but someone had rewritten the ending. And if Poirot was not mistaken, the curtain had not yet fully fallen. Tomorrow he would call them all together. He was almost ready, but tonight he would let the painted room to echo once more and listen for the faint sound of footfall that had gone unseen and unchecked. By daybreak, Dalray Hall had returned to its austere silence, as if the house had taken a breath and held it. Outside, the mist had cleared, revealing dew-soaked grass and distant fields tinted silver by the early sun. Hercule Poirot's moves were as accurate as always. He ate breakfast alone in the conservatory, the warm sunshine illuminating his plate of buttered toast and delicate orange segments. He said little, simply observed and always observed. At 9:30, he instructed Meacham to invite everyone to the painted room. The chairs were already set up, 4 of them in a broad arc facing the empty throne-like seat where Lady Dalray died. Poirot stood by the fireplace, hands folded neatly in front of him. As the room filled with Sir Wilfrid, gloomy and silent, Miss Daphne Ellison, regal in muted green, Felix March, pale and tight, and Mrs. Clarice Duval, controlled and unsmiling. "I thank you all for your promptness," Poirot murmured quietly, as the final shuffle of footsteps ended. "You have been really patient. I now urge that you be even more patient. For the truth, my amice, she walks slowly, but she walks steadily." He turned to the vacant chair and waved toward it, as if to acknowledge its phantom inhabitant. Lady Cynthia Dalray did not die peacefully by natural causes. She did not die by suicide. She was murdered, her neck broken with swift and deliberate force. It wasn't a crime of passion. It was a crime of need, of fear. There was a rustle, the sound of a swiftly pulled breath, and then nothing. Poirot continued, his voice steady. "You see, she was not just a difficult woman or a woman with strong opinions. She was a woman about to reveal something very terrible to another person in this room. She said this to more than one of you." She clutched a pale blue envelope. "We know this from both the maid and her cousin, Mrs. Duval." Clarice offered a slight nod. Sir Wilfrid's face remained expressionless. "But that envelope disappeared," Poirot explained. "It vanished before anyone could see its contents, and so I wondered, what might it have contained? Evidence of an affair? A hidden heir? No. It contained different types of information, such as evidence of fraud. Art fraud." He paused for a moment before turning to face Felix March. Lady Dalray discovered that at least one painting, possibly more, was not what it claimed to be. She'd been sold a forgery. "Did she not threaten you, monsieur?" Felix's lips parted, but no sound came out. His hands were curled into fists on his knees. "Yes," Poirot replied gently. "You admitted as much. You were worried that she would expose not only you, but others, dealers, brokers, and clients participating in laundering forgeries through high society. She sought leverage. She wanted names." Felix eventually spoke, his voice empty. "She said I could maintain my reputation if I returned hers. That is what she said. But I did not kill her." "I believe you," Poirot replied simply. "You were scared, but not reckless. You thought you could delay her, maybe even persuade her to change course, but someone else believed time was not an option." He turned slowly toward Sir Wilfrid. "You went into the painted room the morning after the death. You were alone. You claim to not have noticed the envelope." "That was a lie." Sir Wilfrid's head snapped upward. "Are you accusing me? I see that you have access and motivation, but more importantly, you had knowledge. You knew the will had changed. You stated that you only learned this after her death, which is incorrect. You discovered it 3 days before, when her solicitor attempted to reach you for your signature on a secondary clause. You did not respond. Sir Wilfrid's face had lost its colour. "Cynthia cut you out," Poirot explained calmly, "not out of malice, but out of calculation. She was liquidating assets for the foundation. You were to leave the house, but not the money. And you, Sir Wilfrid, who married her after losing the majority of your family money in risky bets, couldn't afford it." Sir Wilfrid spoke softly. "I didn't—" "No, you did not act out of rage," Poirot replied. "You reacted out of fear, of being left with nothing. She'd embarrassed you before, in private, in front of the others. You knew she was going to approach you again, with evidence of some failure, possibly an affair, perhaps a financial indiscretion, but this time in public. She had gathered an audience." Poirot motioned toward the room. "You waited. You entered. After she had dismissed the maid, you said nothing. Perhaps she offered one last taunt, but you moved rapidly. The mark on the brick outside the painted room guarantees your route through the garden and onto the back patio. Not the major corridor, you carefully timed it, and then you burned the envelope." Sir Wilfrid rose abruptly. "This is outrageous. There is no proof." "Non," Poirot replied. "There is just motive, opportunity, contradiction, and concealment. You see, Sir Wilfrid, I don't need the ashes. I have the backing paper from the envelope. I found it beneath the table. You missed it. That was your mistake. Sir Wilfrid's mouth opened again, but Poirot raised his hand. Please, monsieur, I'm not the law, but I won't be fooled. You told the cops there was no fight between you and Lady Dalray. You informed me that you were unaware of the will. You claim to have seen no envelope, all falsehoods. Lies are not proof, but they leave traces. And I, Hercule Poirot, follow footprints. A lengthy, heavy quiet ensued. Sir Wilfrid remained standing immovable. Felix shifted, and Miss Ellison, who had spoken almost nothing, leaned forward. "And what about the rest of us?" she inquired quietly. "Why were we summoned if you knew it was him?" "Because," Poirot replied, "you each held a piece of the puzzle. You observed her moods. You overheard her comments. You allowed me to sketch the outline of her final evening. Without your truths, his lies would be difficult to discern." Mrs. Duval flashed a weak, humorless smile. She would have enjoyed this, you know, being at the center of such theater. Poirot tilted his head. She choreographed the performance, but someone rewrote the last act. Sir Wilfrid said nothing else. He slumped back in his chair, hands limp. The color had not returned to his face. Poirot addressed the room. "I'll take my findings to the cops. They will undertake their investigation with the knowledge of what has been revealed. But my duty, mes amis, is almost complete." He returned his gaze to the painted wall, this time to Persephone's pale, stubborn arm reaching into the darkness. "She chose her stage," he explained. "She knew what was coming. She was unfamiliar with the form, but she was aware of the danger. Still, she stayed. She always wanted to be seen, even in the end." Poirot stepped back from the fireplace. "Thank you, everybody. I ask that you stay until the authorities arrive." He turned and exited the painted room. The hush behind him did not continue. It clung to the walls, the murals, and the final incomplete sentence of a woman who knew how to wield power like a blade and had drawn it far too many times. Poirot did not leave the painted room immediately. Sir Wilfrid took one more look around the room after sinking back into his chair, while the rest remained absolutely still. He saw the way the sunshine now brushed the edge of the chair where Lady Dalray had sat, just a sliver of warmth against velvet that previously hugged her body in death. There was something dramatic about how it dropped, like a spotlight shone on an empty stage after the curtain had closed. He stepped gently to the back of the room, closing the door behind him with a gentle finality. However, something itched at the edge of his mind, not a doubt but a contour that had not fully developed. Yes, the facts fit. Sir Wilfrid had the strongest motivation and the most obvious opportunity. However, if the case were a painting, Poirot could detect subtle brushstrokes beneath the top layer, indicating the presence of anything beneath the surface, a shadow, a hidden detail, or a repainted face. He strolled carefully to the library where Ellen, the maid, was putting away a tea tray that had been left undisturbed that morning. She looked up, unsure if she was allowed to speak. "Forgive me, mademoiselle," Poirot murmured, his tone polite but intense. "One last question. Were all of the doors secured as usual the night Lady Dalray died?" Helen looked up from the tray. "Yes, sir. I checked them myself at 10, as I always do." "What about the back garden entrance? The one on the west side of the painted room?" She paused. "That one is designed to be bolted from the inside. It does not always stick." "You have to really press it," Poirot nodded. "You checked it?" "I did. However, it is possible that not all of the information was captured. I remember thinking I'd return and try again after the kitchen closed. But I forgot." He offered her a warm grin. "It is not your fault, mademoiselle. Sometimes the smallest flaw in routine permits a major event to enter." She appeared reassured, and Poirot moved on, but her remarks confirmed his suspicions. The mark on the brick and the small indentation in the garden soil didn't match Sir Wilfrid's shoes. He had carefully checked that. Nonetheless, Poirot allowed the story to unfold, allowing the man's lies to come to light. Because when the wrong person delivers the correct lie, it reveals who is listening too closely and who is not. He climbed the steps into the guest wing. Daphne Ellison's door at the far end was open. The woman sat at the small desk, a notebook open in front of her and her pen hovering over the paper. She didn't look up when Poirot entered. "You're very quiet for someone who just watched a man's life fall apart," she added without turning around. Poirot approached, his voice soft. "You are not surprised, madame?" "No," she replied. "I'm not." "But you are unsettled." She eventually looked up, her grey eyes focused. "I've known Wilfred for a long time. He was always a man who existed in someone else's shadow. First his father, then Cynthia. But he was not cruel, yes, weak, but not murderous." "Ah," observed Poirot, "but weakness can take the form of aggression. A desperate guy may be more dangerous than a cruel one." "And you believe he did it?" Poirot considered. "I believe he thought he had no choice." Miss Ellison gave a modest nod. But Poirot noticed her fingers quivering slightly on the pen. He sat in the armchair near the fireplace, waiting, not pushing, allowing silence to fill the gap between them. Then, quietly, she stated, "You missed something." Poirot tilted his head. "Did I?" She wasn't only planning to embarrass Wilfred, she was preparing to set an example for all of us. "I am listening, madame. She didn't really invite us here for her birthday. That was the pretext. She stated that she was tired of lying and keeping up appearances. She stated she was going to rearrange the tableau." Poirot lifted his eyebrow. "A curious phrase." "She meant us," Daphne explained. "She had some bizarre notion of creating her final legacy. She wanted to tell the truth, shameful truths. The forgery, Wilfred's debt, my dependency." "Dependency?" She looked down. "I have had her support for years, quietly. She paid my rent, covered things I couldn't. I've always imagined it was out of loyalty, but you believe it was part of something larger." "Yes," she whispered, "control." "It was always about control." Poirot sat somewhat forward. "She was setting the stage, but you, madame, are not your typical actor. You hide things with moderation rather than spectacular presentations. You saw something, or you know something that was not said." Daphne hesitated. "I saw someone. After I went to bed. A silhouette in the hallway. I believed it was Ellen. But the figure didn't move like a maid. It was overly cautious. They paused outside Cynthia's room. Then walked away. Toward the back stairs, no. Toward the guest wing." Poirot stood slowly. "Thank you, madam. You have been extremely helpful." He exited the chamber, his mind constricting like a knot being dragged through its final loop. He moved quickly, down the corridor, through the east wing, and back into the gallery. Clarisse Duval stood beneath the dark-eyed image of the unreflective woman. She turned as soon as she heard him. Her expression was tranquil. "You've come to finish it, then?" Poirot moved closer. "I've come for the final brushstroke. You see, madame, every murder involves two crimes. The first is death itself. The second is the cover, what the murderer believes they can conceal. But a hidden truth is frail." Clarisse caught his gaze. "And what truth have I concealed? You were in the hallway that night, not the maid, not just a passing figure. You have no proof. I have contradictions. You mentioned she was holding the envelope. You described it in detail. But the maid was the last to see it. That suggests you were with Cynthia later than you stated. She said nothing. You claimed to be the dutiful cousin. But you were her shadow, her mirror. You knew her secrets because she taught you to keep them. There's still stillness. She had helped you both financially and emotionally. But now she's going to expose you, correct? Reveal that the cousin who had long claimed independence was still bound by her purse strings. Clarisse's voice was quiet. She told me I'd never be able to stand on my own unless she removed the crutch. She was about to tell everyone, in front of others. The foundation did not include me. She said she had given me enough already. And you were angry? No, she replied. I was humiliated. Poirot moved a step closer. You waited. You entered while she was alone. She expected Wilfred. She assumed it would be him. Clarisse's lip trembled. She said, "You're early." And then she laughed. That laugh, Poirot's voice sounded low. You grabbed her shoulders. You pushed her into the chair. You didn't mean to kill her, perhaps. But when she tried to rise, I snapped. Clarisse whispered. I didn't even feel it. One moment she was speaking and the next she wasn't. Poirot said nothing. The confession, when it came, was not a performance. It was a crumbling, a quiet collapse of a woman who had lived too long in another's shadow. I burned the envelope, she added. I thought it would be enough, but when you accused Wilfred, I knew you were watching me, waiting. Poirot nodded. Justice must begin with understanding. He did not call the police immediately. He allowed Clarisse to sit in silence, beneath the shadow of the mirrorless woman in the painting. Only when her hands stopped shaking did he move to the telephone in the library and dial the inspector. The second crime had been unveiled, and the truth at last had taken its rightful shape. The sun was well past its zenith when the constable's car pulled through the iron gates of Dalray Hall. The gravel crunched under the tires, a subtle reminder of reality arriving at the edges, of a place too long shrouded in performance and privilege. Poirot stood in the front corridor, hands clasped neatly behind him, his gaze steady as the door opened to admit Inspector Grange, a tall man with a heavy moustache and a straightforward manner Poirot had always regarded with a certain fondness. Grange took one look at Poirot's expression and sighed. "You've already solved it, haven't you?" Poirot inclined his head slightly. "I've discovered the truth. I'll leave it to you to determine whether it counts as a solution." Grange took a glance around the marble-floored foyer. "The victim's name is Cynthia Dalray, neck broken. The suspect was originally the husband. Have you now shifted to the cousin?" Poirot nodded. "Mrs. Clarisse Duval," she confessed calmly. "As I feared, it was not premeditated. However, it was deliberate in the moment." Grange took out his notebook and flipped to a blank page. "Let's go." Through it slowly. Poirot nodded toward the library, where they snuggled up near the fire, the shadows beginning to lengthen behind them. "She came here for a reason," Poirot explained. "Lady Dalray invited all three guests under the pretext of a birthday celebration, but it was actually a reckoning. She hoped to stage a final tableau, a type of revelation. Each guest presented a potential threat, reflection, or liability. Felix March, the art dealer, was to be held accountable for professional fraud. Sir Wilfred, her husband, was to be stripped of any residual claim to her wealth, both financial and emotional. Clarisse Duval, the one with the most to lose, had no remaining protection. Grange wrote attentively, his brow wrinkled. She was still financially dependent? "Yes," replied Poirot. Despite her outward independence, Lady Dalray had been her steadfast supporter for years, but something had shifted. Clarisse was aware that her cousin had excluded her from the new foundation, knew she would be humiliated, maybe publicly, possibly privately. And when she was alone with Lady Dalray that night, she broke. She admitted that? Yes, she did. Not in rage, but rather in resignation. There is no doubt in her voice anymore. Only sorrow. Grange tapped his pen across the edge of the notebook. "And the envelope?" "Destroyed," Poirot responded. "But it contained, I believe, names and evidence, possibly a list of people who benefited from falsified transactions, perhaps also details about Lady Dalray's financial affairs. That was her weapon. Clarisse made certain to eradicate it." Grange sat back. "A nice case. You've completed my work for me." Poirot gazed out the big windows. "No, mon ami, I did what I had to do. The law is yours to carry forward." Grange gave a nod and stood. "I'll speak with her, then accompany her to town." Poirot tilted his head but stayed sitting. The inspector silently exited. Poirot did not arise. He sat for a long time, listening, not to footsteps or voices, but to the silence Dalray Hall had reclaimed for itself, a house of whispers where the truth had to be prodded rather than spoken. He thought again of the painted room, of Persephone's hand endlessly reaching. The mural remained unchanged, even after the drama beneath it had finished. Perhaps the greatest irony of all was that a story of fall and silence presided over a lady who was never silent. Outside the library, the others congregated hesitantly. Felix March leaned on the stair rail, his hands trembling just slightly. Miss Ellison stood with her arms crossed and her expression unreadable. Ellen, the maid, stood back and watched everything with quiet comprehension. Poirot stepped out to join them. "It is over," he murmured softly. "The police are currently speaking with Mrs. Duval. There will be no more disturbances." Felix looked down. "She didn't seem the sort." "No," Poirot answered. "However, desperation is not necessarily dramatic." Sometimes it's freezing, silent, waiting. Miss Ellison's voice sounded low. She was terrified. I see it now. Poirot offered a slight nod. Fear can take many different forms. In silence, in obedience, with bitter loyalty. Nobody talked for a time. Ellen then stepped forward, tangling her hands in her apron. Will they take her away today? Yes, Poirot replied kindly. She confessed, but she will not be deterred. She'll need someone, the girl stated abruptly. When it's finished, someone who continues to feel she is more than just that one time. Poirot stared at her for a long time. You are kind, mademoiselle, do not lose that. She looked down and flushed. Poirot turned to Felix. And you, monsieur, must start again. But more honestly, Felix offered a bitter smile. I suppose I deserve what's coming. Poirot said nothing. He simply turned toward the staircase, pausing once to glance up at the top landing, where the corridor divided left and right, toward the chambers where individuals had slept restlessly, unaware that death was just one door away. Later, as the constables departed with Clarisse Duval in the back seat, her face pale but composed, Poirot remained at the gate in silence. He didn't wave. He didn't bow. He simply watched. When the automobile disappeared around the curve in the lane, he turned and walked back to the house. Inside the decorated room, he stood for the final time. The chair remained. The mural loomed. However, the quiet had taken on a new aspect. Not expectancy, not a menace, only quietness. Poirot approached the small table near the chair and moved the brandy glass, tilting it slightly so that it faced outward. Then he smoothed the chair's cushion, removed a little of invisible lint from the velvet and stood back. There, he muttered. Now it is neat. He left Dalray Hall that evening as the sun fell behind the hedges, turning the upper windows golden. The pebbles crunched under his feet. Behind him the house remained silent, no longer waiting for performance or punishment. Only memory. And possibly, somewhere in the painted room, the tiniest sound of a voice still lingered. Reaching, falling, and finally at peace. The trip back to London was peaceful. Poirot sat alone in the train's rear cabin, surrounded by the faint clatter of wheels on tracks and the regular sigh of motion. Outside, the scenery slipped by in green and grey smudges, rolling hills, faded farmhouses, narrow lanes already absorbed by dusk. He kept his gloved hands folded neatly in his lap, but his mind was active. There were no more uncertainties about what had happened at Dalray Hall. The confession had been plain. The motive is precise, the moment of violence deeply human, but the case has always left a trace as subtle as chalk dust on velvet. Murder is not a mystery that concludes with a confession. It creates a trail of absences, a seat that will no longer be occupied, a name that will no longer be spoken without a shadow, and a quiet that alters the contour of a space. In this case, it left behind a woman whose legacy was as meticulously planned as her death was chaotic. Lady Cynthia Dalray had planned the drama without expecting she would be its victim. She had invited the players, composed the overture, organized the setting with the precision of a writer, planning to command the drama from start to finish. But what she had not prepared for, what no writer can predict, was that one of her characters would improvise. Poirot's thoughts returned to Clarisse Duval, reclining beneath the mirrored image in the West Gallery, her hands clasped securely in her lap as she whispered the words that would change everything. She had not sobbed, pleaded, or cursed the deceased. She simply unwrapped the truth with slow, trembling fingers, not for attention, not for sympathy. But carrying the untruth eventually became too heavy, and yet, even now, Poirot wondered if Cynthia Dalray had foreseen it, whether her odd calm, in those closing days, her gestures, her cryptic statements, her insistence on utilizing the painted room, had been a means of daring fate to interrupt her story. A test, or perhaps it's a provocation. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded slip of paper. The handwriting was tight and slanted. The solicitor discovered it in Cynthia's secret desk drawer and forwarded it to Poirot just that morning before he boarded the train. Not part of the official evidence, but a personal note addressed to no one specifically. If I leave before I have spoken clearly, Do not assume quiet equals absence. I left everything where it was supposed to be. That which cannot be spoken can nevertheless be observed. There were no signatures, just one line beneath the rest, underlined twice. That which cannot be spoken can nevertheless be observed. Poirot folded the paper and put it back into his pocket. It was an unusual line, vague, dramatic, but unmistakably her. She did not write it for posterity. She had written it for control. The train slowed as it approached Victoria Station. The enormous iron skeleton of London's rail terminal appeared, its lamps just starting to glow amber in the dimming light. Poirot stood, retrieved his small valise and stepped down onto the platform with his customary care. As he moved through the crowd, a voice cried out behind him, low, frantic, just over the hum of discussion. "Monsieur Poirot." He turned. A young man wearing spectacles approached, breathless, holding a brown paper box wrapped in string. "This was delivered to our office by courier. Addressed to you." The handwriting matched a file labeled sensitive. "I was instructed to transmit it to you straight." Poirot took the parcel with a modest bow. "Merci, monsieur." He waited until he arrived at his unit on the 3rd floor of his quiet building in Whitehaven Mansions before opening it. He gently placed the case on the table, pulled a little blade from his desk drawer, and cut the knot with one stroke. The paper slipped away with a whisper. Inside was a thin canvas board, 12 inches by 16, wrapped in cloth. No note. There's no explanation. Poirot removed the cloth carefully and flipped the board upright. It was a painting. A woman sits on a high-backed chair. Her face is half-shadowed. The background is unmistakable. The swirling fresco of Persephone above her. The painted chamber. Cindy Dalray, but not as she had been discovered. This was a portrait done from memory, or perhaps from the imagination. The painting depicted her with open eyes. They were open, cold, observant, and strangely delighted. Her hands were not resting idly in her lap, but were carefully folded over a pale envelope. A single line engraved into the wood behind the frame lay beneath the brushwork, that which cannot be expressed. Poirot looked at the painting for a long time. The hand that painted it was skilled but unprofessional. Someone is intimate with her. Someone who had seen her in that place, possibly on a regular basis, and captured her with awe rather than affection, or fear. The ramifications progressively took shape. It had not been painted recently. The canvas was old, maybe months, but it had only just arrived, seemingly timed to coincide with the completion of the probe. Was this her final flourish, a delayed performance, or had someone else discovered the painting and determined that Poirot, of all persons, should see it? He stood, lifted the portrait, and leaned it against the wall next to his desk. He didn't hang it. He didn't frame it. He just let it watch him. That night, Poirot sat at the window as the city lit itself in thousands of dispersed golds and whites. He didn't take any calls, don't read any paper. He simply sat in silence, allowing the case to be resolved. He had fulfilled his responsibilities. The law has an answer. Justice had been named, yet within him a subtle disquiet remained, not of guilt or uncertainty, but of familiarity. For in Cynthia Dalray's final days she had created something more enduring than a crime or a scandal. She had created a portrait of herself in the minds of those she had left behind, painstakingly, carved with contrast. A woman who handled quiet as a scalpel. Even those who wished to forget her were unable to do so. Even Poirot would remember her, not for the lies she spread, but for the manner she assured she would never vanish from the canvas. The morning after. The painting arrived. Poirot rose slowly. His motions, while meticulous as always, had a new weight to them, as if the case hadn't entirely left him. In fact, it hadn't. Lady Dalray lingered not just in the brushstrokes of the canvas now lying against the wall of his sitting room, but also in the precision with which she exited, in the questions she had hidden rather than asked outright. He dressed with more care than usual, wearing a slightly darker cravat and a pearl tie pin instead of his customary amber. The mirror reflected habit, not vanity, a type of ritual that kept him grounded in the known, when the shadows of unfinished business lingered beneath the surface. Breakfast remained untouched. The artwork remained where he had left it, her eyes locked on him with the determination of someone who knew she would not be silenced, even in death. Poirot hadn't determined if the portrait's arrival was her final statement or an echo from someone else. That uncertainty was unusual for him to allow, and yet here it was, occupying a space in his otherwise organized flat. By 9 o'clock, he'd scheduled an appointment with Inspector Grange at Scotland Yard. They sat across from each other in Grange's modest office, the inspector half buried in paper files, his sleeves rolled up to his elbows, and a faint aroma of tobacco hung in the air. Grange looked at the photograph Poirot had provided of the painting, which had been swiftly but clearly duplicated. "This came to you after the case was closed?" Poirot nodded. Delivered to the station by hand, the courier only knew it was marked as urgent and personal. There was no return address. Grange examined the snapshot, touching it once with the back of his pen. "You think it's significant?" "I do not think," Poirot answered quietly. "But I know it is. So why bring it here? You have already solved the case. Confession, purpose, all of it is clean." "Too clean," Poirot commented, leaning nearer. "Clarice Duval murdered Lady Dalray. Yes, she admitted it. However, this painting was not hers. The technique is incorrect. She is a clever woman, but she has never used a paintbrush. I confirmed it discreetly. There is no record of her studying art, collecting art, or expressing any interest other than Cynthia's." Grange raised an eyebrow. "So the painting came from someone else?" "Oui. Someone was watching. Someone close enough to see Lady Dalray in that chamber, frequently enough to recall her pose, her posture. The envelope. It is shown just as the maid described it. The painting is not only detailed but also intimate." Grange nodded slowly, indicating that he was beginning to understand. "You believe there was another player, an unseen one, someone who knew her secret, who knows what was in the envelope, someone who chose not to speak then or now but wanted me to witness this." Grange took another look at the photograph. "So, what is the message? That Clarice wasn't the only one who wanted Cynthia to leave?" Poirot tapped his fingers lightly together. "No, I suppose Clarice acted alone, but I think someone else was observing, and perhaps waiting." He rose. "I won't keep you, mon ami, but I need to return to Dalray Hall." Grange's mouth twisted. "Back to the theatre, eh?" Poirot gave himself a slight smile. "To the dressing room behind the curtain, Inspector." He arrived at Dalray Hall the next afternoon. The sky was lower than usual, dense with an immovable grey that made the home appear smaller and more impenetrable. Ellen, the maid, opened the door, her surprise hardly hidden. "Monsieur Poirot?" she inquired. "I thought it was finished." "Did I, mademoiselle? But something lingers." She allowed him in, and the echo of his footfall on the marble reminded him of the calm of the painted room. He didn't go there. Instead, he requested for the key to Lady Dalray's personal quarters, her sitting room, not the one she entertained guests in, but the private chamber adjoining her bedroom. It had been locked since the night of her death, left untouched by police, or personnel acting on the solicitor's instructions. The key took some time to find. When Poirot opened the door, the air was thick with scent, paper, and something vaguely acidic. Varnish, perhaps. The drapes had been pulled for several days. Light slid across the room in feeble slants, catching on gilded frames, desk ornaments, and a little easel in the corner. Poirot approached it gently. It wasn't the same artwork, but it was similar. Another look at the painted chamber. This time the chair was vacant, the lighting was heightened, and the fresco above had harsher lines. It was unfinished, and below it were more sketches, quick outlines, primarily in charcoal, and some color experiments on stiff card. All of them displayed the same settings. Cynthia appeared differently in each, sat and triumphant, hunched and hollow, and with her back completely turned. Poirot studied them one by one. The style remained consistent, confident, observant, but not Clarice. He turned next to the small writing desk near the window, opening each drawer carefully. In the second, he discovered a sealed envelope bearing only one initial, E. Inside there was a folded note and a little snapshot of the painted room from a decade ago. Cynthia stood beside the same chair, younger and yet arrogant, one hand resting on the backrest and the other clutching a paintbrush. The letter was brief. Ellen, keep them protected. If something happens, you'll know who to believe. Don't destroy them, not even tough ones. Certain things must be seen to be comprehended. You are the only one who truly watched. C. Poirot folded the letter slowly. The maid, not the painter, but the viewer, the one who moved silently through the house, constantly present but dismissed. Cynthia had entrusted her, not with conversation or confession, but with access. And Ellen maintained that confidence long after the woman died. The paintings, the parcel, the solitude. She knew they would be important, but she wasn't sure how, not when. Until now. Poirot found her in the kitchen, polishing silver with quiet efficiency. She looked up, startled as he entered. I wondered, she said softly, if you'd come back. You sent it, he replied simply. She nodded. I wasn't sure what else to do. I wasn't sure if it would signify anything. I found the painting many weeks ago before she died, hidden behind books in her private chamber. I believe she made it months prior, perhaps a little longer. I kept it. She didn't tell me to, but I realized it wasn't anything to toss out. You wrapped it and sent it after the case was closed. I waited, she explained. I wanted to make sure. Nobody else would bury it. Poirot offered a little bow. You did well, mademoiselle. Very well. He left her there, not with compliments, but with thanks. For not all truths are expressed in words. Some are merely visible. And Ellen, who was silent and unnoticeable too, most people had maintained the last truth, not only of Cynthia's death, but also of her design. Poirot finally hung the artwork once he returned to London, not at the salon. Not where guests would mistake it for adornment, but in his modest chamber, he pondered, where he paced, where quiet reigned. And when he really looked at it, he saw something he hadn't seen before. Cynthia holds the envelope in her hands, her head tilted slightly. Her eyes revealed a peculiar sense of satisfaction. She knew it would end like way, and she had made it a point to always be the final witness to herself. The weeks passed slowly, but steadily, like a clock wound by a meticulous hand. The incident at Dalray Hall disappeared from public consciousness with startling quickness. The newspaper columns, once brimming with conjecture, gave place to new controversies, and the art world, shook briefly by whispers of falsified acquisitions, clenched its lips and adjusted its glasses. March & Bell fine art advisors closed quietly, and few people noticed. Fewer still reported that an unsigned, unsettling portrait was surreptitiously bought by a private collection and never displayed. For Poirot, the affair did not stop with Clarice Duval's imprisonment, nor with Ellen's discreetly dispatched painting. No, the incident lingered, not as an unresolved question, but as an unusual instance of tragedy that could not be easily reduced to a single cause. Yes, murder is committed, but not solely with malicious intent. A woman murdered not out of greed or malice, but because she was tired of being forgotten, even by someone who had once helped her. Cynthia Dalray had received her finale, albeit not the one she had hoped for. Her final performance was reinvented in the last few moments, not by her, but by those around her. Still, it had her fingerprints, the careful theatrics, the accuracy of setting, the echoing motifs derived from myth. In the end, she had control over everything, except the act of violence that took her life. Poirot sat by the fire at Whitehaven. Mansions, the last of the autumn chill slipping through the window panes. Hastings, across from him, frowned his brow as he watched the flames. You believe Clarice's confession still leaves something unsaid, Hastings finally remarked. I believe. It reveals more than she intended, Poirot explained. But no, mon ami, there is nothing hidden that demands light, only nuance. The case was never simply about who struck the blow, but rather who set up the theatre in which it was delivered. Madame Dalray had summoned her cast precisely. She wielded power like a brush, and she understood, I believe, that if one plays director for too long, someone else will eventually pick up the screenplay. She was manipulating all of them, Hastings explained. Poirot nodded. And they were complicit, willing or not. Even the maid, who watched more than she spoke, became a part of the show. But what is most revealing is not the crime, it is what it exposed in the living. Clarice's bitterness, Wilfred's fear, Daphne's loyalty turned into reliance. March, clinging to illusion, with the desperation of a man drowning in his own reflection. And the painting? Poirot smiled weakly. That was her safeguard, her legacy. Her final statement was that even in death, she could not be erased out. It was not meant to be a hint, mon ami, it was a coda. Her self-portrait created in silence and given posthumously as proof of authorship. Hastings shakes his head. You do pick the most complicated cases. No, Poirot replied. It is not I who chooses them. It's always the human heart, how it folds. On itself, how it conceals its bruises under layers of civility and ceremony. He stood and walked to the small area where the painting was now hanging. He saw it not as a mystery but as a mirror. She had known, not everything but enough. The woman in the painting was not afraid, not resigned. She was waiting, and Poirot, despite arriving after the closing curtain, had been seen, predicted. He straightened his cuffs. Let us go, Hastings, he finally murmured. The fire dies. The story is told. Tomorrow, there will be another whisper, another shadow, another performance. But for tonight, we let her keep the stage. And when they went, the painted woman remained precisely where she had always intended, watching, forever framed, forever seen.